Hello, my friends. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm your host, Vanessa, and I am so pumped for today's episode. We have one of my favorite researchers, Dr. Bill Campbell. He is a scientist who studies body recomposition, fat loss, and fitness, a lot of times in individuals who want to improve their body composition, who are not necessarily obese, but are doing resistance training or active. And he also publishes a fantastic monthly research review that I absolutely love and read every single month, and have personally been featured in and going to be featured in more in the future as well. And it is such a great research review. I've learned so much from it, but every month, basically, Dr. Campbell breaks down a couple of relevant studies and talks about the strengths and weaknesses and the findings. And it is just such a valuable way to be able to learn about the science of body recomposition and also understand how to break down and interpret studies as well, which a lot of you ask me about how to do that, how to learn how to do that. And sometimes you need to have a PhD, which Dr. Campbell talks about, but you also can learn how to read and assess research. And we're going to talk about that a little bit at the top of the episode. We're mostly talking about the concept of protein leverage. There's evidence on both sides, but does eating more protein actually help with satiety and satiation? And we're going to talk about a really fantastic high quality research done on that. Also, does eating more protein really help us to burn more fat? Is that conclusive? We talk about research and evidence on that. We also talk about peptides like Ozempic and Wegovy and fat loss, this fat loss pharmaceutical that has been getting a lot of attention, and his opinion on that, and so much more. So I absolutely love this episode. I hope that you enjoy it as well. I can't wait to hear your takeaways and insights on the episode. So please do share them with me in our Facebook group, which is the Optimum Protein Podcast. And I would love to chat more with you about all these topics in there. So before we jump in fully to the episode today, welcome to the Tone Device, the newest breath ketone analyzer by Ketogenic Girl. With the Tone Device, you can instantly know if you are burning body fat. You can say goodbye to expensive, painful ketone testing. With the Tone Device, you simply breathe into the device and you will get an instant reading, letting you know if you are burning fat or in the fat burning zone. With the Tone Device, you can now more easily and effectively reach your fitness goals using the feedback that it provides. Welcome to the Tone Device. Welcome to unlimited testing. Buy yours today and get in the fat burning zone. All right, now without further ado, let's get into today's episode. Well, Dr. Campbell, it's great to have you back on the podcast today. How are you doing today?
I'm great. And is this number 3 for me?
Yes, I think this is the hat trick. This is your third appearance on the podcast. If I had it my way, you'd be on like every quarter or, all the time to talk about your fantastic research reviews, which I love so much. And I've been learning so much also about the way that you break down studies. And that's one of the things I wanted to start out chatting about is how can listeners, and I know a lot of listeners really want to know, how can I tell the difference between poor quality research and high quality research? And also, how can I learn to read and interpret studies? And my answer is usually just read as many as you can, and you'll start to, understand them more and more. But your research review also, I think, really teaches people a lot about the different kinds of studies and that kind of thing.
Yeah. So I'm going to answer it with something that probably nobody wants to hear, but it's not easy to understand, oh, that's a great study, or this one wasn't good. And the reason I say that is, I have a master's degree and then a PhD degree. So when you get a PhD, you're studying how research is done. So it's kind of ingrained into you. Now, that's what you said is exactly right. How are you going to get better? Well, you're just going to have to read and try to come up with, some type of system of, hey, did they do this? Did they do that? Almost like a checklist. So one thing just in general, you always want to ask, was a study randomized? Did you see that? Did they randomize the groups, the subjects to their respective groups? And then there's just, and I always say this too, once you get into an area, you're going to start seeing the same researcher names over and over. And I think it's really important that the researchers have a good reputation.
Mm-hmm.
And because if they have a good reputation, and usually a good reputation means that typically what this means is they're not finding sexy results time after time after time. So in the sports supplement world, you can kind of see those who are, because when you keep publishing studies that show that this supplement's great over and over, and different supplements, there's usually some type of compensation or benefit. So I'll say, keep reading, critiquing, try to understand, do they have a good reputation in their field? That's another thing. And then I think, I don't have the only research review, there are others, but I do think these research reviews that are available, they do help with that skill set of, because I think most of them, they, like in mine, I'll just speak for myself. Like I have, what were the strengths of this study? What were the limitations of this study? So that's that quickly, and you're going to start to see themes like, was the study long enough to even detect a change in what the researchers wanted? Were the groups randomized? So yeah, that would be my answer. And I wish it was easier than that, but it's research is not easy. That's why a lot of people don't do it.
Yes. And I love how in your review, you break down the terms. You always explain so that, people say, this was a randomized crossover study. And then you explain what a crossover study is and how both groups are experiencing, what they're testing. And for an example, like you always define the terms a lot. And I think that's really educational for people, because sometimes it can be intimidating to, have papers and you try to read them at the beginning and you're like, I just feel like I'm not getting, the info. And then I think the researcher bias, I think is really important. And then disclosures, like you mentioned, who are they doing the research for? Like, are they doing it just out of the pure intentions of, getting the actual advancing science, contributing to science? That sometimes, the research is sponsored, like you said, and it's important to look at like who's sponsoring it and are the results that they found supporting, that company. And it doesn't mean that they're mutually exclusive, right? Like you can have researchers that have a good reputation that also do sponsored research. I'm not saying that all sponsored research is bad. It's like you said, just the consistency of results and what they're looking for.
Yeah. And something else I would want to say, and I tell this to my students, when you have a study that you want to read, if you know what you're interested in, so I'll speak for myself. I'm interested in fat loss, generally speaking. So if there's a study that measured fat loss, but the researchers also measured, let's say, 33 different blood variables, hormones, enzymes, things like that, and they looked at some genetic markers, I could care less about that stuff. And I just focus all of my attention to fat loss. And I think people that are new to reading research, they feel like they have to take it all in and understand all of it. And I'm like, life is too short to waste time. Not that those things aren't important, but if it's not interesting to you, that just makes an already laborious process that much harder. So
yes,
don't feel bad about cherry picking the variables that you are interested in. So there's the first thing. And the second thing is there's always a section about how the study was analyzed, the statistics. Maybe my colleagues would be very upset with me. Skip that. You're not going to understand it anyway. I
Right.
barely understand the statistics in many of these studies. So what I do, and what I encourage people to do, is see how the authors interpreted their findings.
Yeah.
So that saves you 10 minutes of just being frustrated that they used like an analysis of covariance or a t-test, like all the things that really we're not going to learn anyway unless we're taking, like I had probably 5 statistics classes in my doctoral degree. So I appreciate that is another complete area of research. So don't feel like you have to even read that. So what are you interested in? How did they organize their study? Does it make sense to you? And then what were the results, and how did the authors interpret the results? Now that's where some nuance comes in. Sometimes the authors may be biased, or sometimes the author's interpretation of their results aren't how you or I would interpret them. But at least that takes away some of the things that I think are most challenging.
Yeah, it's so important to take your own, form your own opinions about their results. There was one study I was reading recently, and it was saying how people on higher protein diets ended up gaining more weight. And it was I think maybe it was one that you shared. It was an overfeeding study, but they were talking about how the people on the higher protein levels gained more weight, but actually when you look at what the weight was composed of, it was actually mostly lean body mass.
Yep.
And they did gain, like all the participants gained fat, but it seemed to me in reading the paper itself that they were kind of angling it more towards like saying that if you eat more protein, you're going to gain more weight when you're overeating. But that wasn't really the conclusion, right?
Yes, if it's a study I'm thinking of. Oh, by the way, rule number 1, when you're reading any weight loss research, do not focus on the weight. If it's a weight loss study, you have to peel that back and then say, what was the composition of the weight loss, the weight gain? Exactly what you said. If you don't do that, you will be taken down which may be a completely incorrect interpretation of the data. And let me give one huge example to this. Everybody believes that diet is superior to exercise for weight loss. And that is not true. When there's only been a handful of studies, I can probably count them on one hand. When you make the energy deficits, the reduction in calories, the same between exercise and diet, the exercise is much more, because what happens is all of the weight lost, nearly all of the weight lost, is coming from body fat. But when we diet, we're losing some lean tissue and some fat tissue. Now, that's not to say, again, if somebody says, hey, I want to lose weight, should I do exercise only or should I do diet only? I would still say diet, because it's harder. That's a smaller hill to climb, in my opinion. But when you look at the composition of weight changes with exercise versus diet, exercise it maintains lean mass, and you get all those other health benefits of physical activity. But even to this day, a large part of the scientific community, they'll just spout, yep, you don't lose as much weight with exercise as you do with dieting. And that's true, because you're losing a lot more lean mass when dieting. So yes, if you only look at weight, you're given a completely different interpretation.
So in terms of the different ways to measure body composition, I know there are a lot out there. Not all of them are as accurate as, sort of the more lab grade measurements, I guess, that you can do. And a lot of them are maybe good for looking at the trends. But in terms of, when I studied sports nutrition, DEXA was the gold standard for that. And I know there's something new coming out. I think Dr. Gabrielle Line was telling me about it. It's like D3 creatine. It's like a ingestible that you take, and then it measures your actual lean body mass. But as far as looking at the measures of body composition, when you're looking at a study, when do you feel the most confident about the results that they're getting or looking at?
So the first thing is, did the researchers use the same device under the same standardized conditions? And what you said is very important. What are the trends? If you're just measuring a group of people one time, none of the methods are going to be perfect. But what we really care about is, does a given device, does it accurately detect what's actually occurring? So if fat is lost, can it detect it? So I've used skin folds in my lab. In fact, we still use skin folds as a secondary measure in a lot of what I do. As long as the technician is trained and has a lot of experience, skin folds can be great. And then, DEXA, I would say, yeah, if I had to wager which one is most accurate, I would probably say DEXA. But bod pods are good. We use ultrasound in my lab because we study a lot of lean people. And what ultrasound does is it allows you to measure the actual thickness of body fat. Here's something nobody really ever appreciates. None of these methods actually measure body fat. None of them. DEXA measures the density of 3 tissues in the body. Bod pod measures your air displacement. Skin folds measure the thickness of a skin and adipose tissue thickness. Ultrasound, is measuring the thickness of fat. BIA measures body water, and then it estimates body fat percentage. So none of these methods are actually measuring body fat. The closest ones are ultrasound and skin folds, because you're literally measuring fat. And I think it goes back. I tend not to really, I know some people get really uptight about that stuff. And my response is, did they have the subjects test first thing in the morning on an empty stomach? Ideally, they didn't exercise the day prior. Those are kind of the research standards. And as long as they did that at the beginning and the end of the study, and they used the DEXA both times, or they used the bod pod both times, I don't stress too much about that. Now, that's what I do when I'm reading research. What, unfortunately, in the real world, we have people that one day they go get an in-body scan, and then 4 months later, oh, there's a DEXA now, and I'm going to go get a DEXA. And then they compare and they think, oh, I've lost 5 pounds, but my body fat went up 5%. You can't compare device to device. That's very dangerous.
Completely agree with that. Now, you recently had an issue of your research review out that talked about rapid fat loss. So what did you find interesting about that study? What made you want to include it? What made me have this, and I'm going to say it's an intense focus on rapid fat loss, was because my lab conducted a rapid fat loss study. We just submitted it for publication. So can you give us a preview?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. I'd be happy to do that. And then I'm happy to talk about the rapid fat loss study as well. But a little context, there's not anybody in evidence-based fitness and nutrition who has been louder than me, who says, don't be in a hurry. Take your time. There's a lot of damage that can be done if you lose weight too fast. And all of that is true. And I just spoke at a conference this weekend, and I presented the study after study after study where this happens. But in my own lab, we did a rapid fat loss study, and I can get into the details if you like. But essentially what we found was that we were able to lose significant amounts of body fat and maintain lean mass in our study. And I was like, I didn't expect that to happen. And then again, now I'm really doing a deep dive on this because you have to be aware of all the other research published. So then I found what I literally call it the crazy rapid fat loss study, where this was in my research review last month or 2 months ago. They put these subjects, these obese males, on an 85% caloric deficit for 4 days. They had them exercise for 9 hours, nearly 9 hours per day. It was crazy. So would you like me to dive a little deeper on my study, or the crazy one, or both?
I'd love to hear about your study first, because I'm sure you had some really interesting, conclusions from it.
Yes.
Yeah, I'd love to hear about that. And then we can talk about the other one.
So what we did was we took resistance trained males and females who were not obese or overweight. So lean people trying to lose more body fat. That's what we did. And just to give this context, this was during COVID. So we started it before COVID, got delayed for a while, and then we finished it after COVID, essentially. And what we did was we put these subjects, and it was males and females, on a nearly 40% caloric deficit for 2 weeks, 37.5%. We required that they continue their normal training program. So resistance training, we just said, don't change that. Don't change your cardio. The only thing we want you to change is to reduce your calories a lot for 2 weeks, and also to make sure that you're getting a gram per pound of protein, or 2.2 grams per kilogram of body weight. So a lot of the calories that they were eating were coming from protein in this study, because low calories and high protein, that demands that a lot of the calories are coming from protein. So after the 2 weeks, we said, do whatever you want. We would call that ad libitum feeding. So if you want to continue to diet, go ahead. Or if you want to go to a all-you-can-eat buffet every day for the next 2 weeks, you can do that. We don't care. We don't care what you do. Just come back to our lab so we can measure you again 2 weeks after the required diet was over. So let me explain what we found. So during the first 2 weeks, the subjects did exactly what we asked, which was awesome, because that's always a level of anxiety. You tell people to diet, they don't. You tell them to eat high protein, they don't. But our subjects did great. And that's because of my research staff. I mean, we have a large staff, and they really answered a ton of questions for people who were struggling. So a lot of support, which again, that's something else, just off topic for a second. Research studies often don't mimic real world, because in the real world, people might not have a team of scientists and research assistants helping them and guiding them.
True.
So what we saw was, yes, they dieted nearly 40% for 2 weeks. And then in the last 2 weeks, on average, they continued to diet, but only at about a 13% caloric deficit. And protein actually went back down to about 1.8 grams per kg, which was what they were doing before the study started. So think of this as 2 weeks of a pretty severe deficit or aggressive deficit, and then they increased it, but we're still in a deficit for the final 2 weeks. So now this is where the moments of my life that I'll never forget. So the first 2 weeks, where I'm analyzing the data, and I realized they lost a significant amount of body weight. They lost like 1.2% body fat, which is about twice the rate of body fat loss that you would see in a moderate caloric deficit. And then, as we just talked, you have to look at the composition of where the weight is coming from. Where's the body? Where's the compartments? How much of this weight is coming from fat? How much is coming from lean mass? So they lost about 1.5 kilograms of weight, so a little over 3 pounds in the first 2 weeks. And about 2/3 of that was from body fat. 1/3 was from lean mass. And that's not good. That's more lean mass than what you would expect or than what you would want. But it's also very common when you're going to be that aggressive with dieting. And after well, let me go here next. We also did something else. We had the ability to measure total body water. And we did that. And then we said, okay, we have these lean mass losses, but how much of that was from body water? And what we realized was that almost all of the lean mass losses were actually coming from the body water compartment. By the way, this will be in one of my future issues. Got me on the whole kick of rapid fat loss stuff. So now we have to interpret this. Wow, that's interesting. So essentially, and we when you account for body water losses, we call it dry fat-free mass, because what you have is body fat, then you have this fat-free mass, which is everything else. But now we have water, the water compartment of that, and what's left is basically just protein and minerals in your body, and we call that dry fat-free mass. And what we realized was that didn't really change at all. I mean, it was very minimal. And at a month out, after the 2 weeks of increasing the calories a little, to about a 13% deficit. They gained everything back. They actually gained a little bit more dry than what they had at the start. And even if you don't consider the water, all of the fat-free mass was recovered after those 2 weeks. So my interpretation changed. I went from, yeah, this is too aggressive, we don't want to recommend this, to, when you actually consider where the weight is coming from. By the way, when you lose body water, most of our body water is in our skeletal muscle. So it's going to be biased to make it look like it's coming from lean mass stores. And you would know this just from ketogenic diet. And there's large fluctuations just in the carbohydrate content of muscle cells that can really also influence water and how these body composition tests are interpreted.
Yes.
So I see this and I'm like, wow, we did not cause any harm. Harm would be losing muscle tissue. We didn't do that. So then I have to go back and look at all of the other research, which informed my opinion. And guess what they never did? They never measured body water. So everybody's interpreting this research as losing muscle, losing lean tissue. And that's not to say that there wasn't some, but I think had they measured total body water, and by the way, all of the other studies, I'm talking 2 weeks, 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks at the most, these rapid, aggressive studies. And then what I learned when I start looking into the body water research literature, body water is highly fluid, pun intended, highly variable for the first 2 weeks, up to about 2 weeks. So if you're going to do any type of ketogenic diet or rapid fat loss in a short period of time, you need to measure body water changes. And then what happens within about a month, body water levels go back to where they were before you did anything. So it's very transient, but if you're going to do this in less than a month, you really need to have that data so that you can interpret what's happening with the body composition compartments accurately. And when we did that, no harm, only excess. Well, these people didn't have excess fat, but only body fat was lost.
Wow, that's amazing. It's really funny with DEXA because I think there was one video I saw a long time ago of someone drank like a gallon of water right before their DEXA, and it was like they gained 20 pounds of, lean body mass because the water influences it so much. So what do you think it was about your protocol in this study that made the participants mostly lose fat? Because I think that's probably the key information there.
Yes. So 3 things. 2 of them aren't going to surprise anybody, but the third, I think, is the teachable moment with what we did. So having them continue to resistance train. So the way that I describe this is when you're dieting, you're putting your body into a catabolic environment. So what can we do to offset the catabolic stimulus that comes from low calories? Well, there's resistance training that imparts an anabolic stimulus to the body. So we did that. What's the other thing? What's the other anabolic thing we can do? Protein. Protein is an anabolic nutrient for the most part. It actually does cause fat loss, which makes it catabolic nutrient as well. Different podcast.
Yeah.
So having high protein and resistance training are what allowed us to maintain lean mass. And the teachable moment, which is now what I say, I've changed my mind. I still think rapid fat loss can be dangerous. And by dangerous, I mean it can cause lean mass. But as long as the approach is short term, so the way that I'm saying it, you get in and you get out, and you get in quick, so the body responds by losing fat. And then you get out of this aggressive deficit fast enough that the body doesn't start adapting and then starting to take lean tissue. So what is the length? 2 weeks of being aggressive and then coming out with resistance training with protein. I think that's that's my teachable moment. Now, I also want to say a lot of people will take this and they'll say, oh, good, this is crash dieting. This works. No, it is not advocating crash dieting. What this is suggesting is that for people that are fit, that can resistance train, that can tolerate high protein, a very precision strategy for those types of people it seems to be an effective fat loss approach. For somebody, I'll just say like that sedentary, and they're just going to drop their calories and starve themselves for 2 weeks. Those are the people, and the research would suggest those are the people that have fat overshoot, hyperphagia after the diet's over. They gain more weight and more fat within like a month of that kind of approach ending than what they had before they started the diet. And that's very sad. And unfortunately, that's a pattern that crash dieters tend to live.
Yeah. And I experienced for myself what that does over the years is, you lose fat and muscle and then you gain back fat. And then you end up with like 38% body fat. And it's quite alarming. And I shudder to think what would have happened if I hadn't have changed course and kind of figured all this stuff out, because I mean, on the path I was going with the crash dieting and the, just doing always like high carb diets without really prioritizing protein well at all, because I was plant-based, like I just was ending up with poorer and poorer body composition on the other side of all those diets. So it's so important to really seek quality weight loss and to make sure to do it properly. So that you don't get into that kind of situation over time. Yeah. And thankfully I was able to correct it. And I hope other people can correct it, especially, who are like, I was normal weight obese, which is like its own category. But I do worry about people like that because it's harder to tell sometimes that that's what's going on unless you get a body scan done and then you get that insight. So it sounds like, the recommendation is to make sure that it's short term so that you don't like your metabolic rate doesn't adjust. So what did you find in the study that you reviewed that you included in the rapid fat loss study?
So previous rapid fat loss studies were 28 days, 21 days, 14 days, 10 days in another one. Mine was 14 days. This study had a 4-day rapid fat loss approach. They took obese males and they put them on an 85% caloric deficit. So basically they were eating 320 calories per day for 4 days. In addition to that, They had them do arm cranking exercise for 45 minutes per day during these 4 days and walk 8 hours per day. So let's just call it nearly 9 hours of exercise. Very low calories. And what the researchers did, which was awesome, was they said, okay, we're going to do this for 4 days. Clearly they're going to lose weight, but how much lean tissue, how much body fat? And then they basically refed them for 3 days. And at the end of the week, they said, what happens after just bringing them back to maintenance? And then a month later, they measured their body composition, because historically, when you're that aggressive, that's when you see people they rebound. They have more body fat after a month than what they had before they started their diet. And then they did the same thing at a year. So they really did a good job of saying, we don't want to just focus on 4 days. We want to make sure that they were able to maintain this weight loss and this fat loss to make sure that we're not causing harm with this. And what they found was during the 4 days, they lost, I think it was like 5% of their body weight, which is a lot of body weight in 4 days. But of course, there's very little calories, tons of movement. And 3 days out, or after 3 days of refeeding, they still maintained their fat. A month out, they maintained their fat loss. And a year out, it was just a little bit less. So essentially, they improved a lot of health markers with 4 days of a very severe approach. Now, interesting, during the 4 days of aggressive dieting, they lost a lot of lean body mass. But magically, and in quotes, 3 days later, when they started eating their normal diet again, they gained almost all of their lean mass back. So what does that tell us? And the researchers also discussed this. They didn't lose lean mass. They lost body water, which masked as lean mass. So there's another study. This one is about 8 years old, that if you're not measuring body water, you're going to come to an incorrect conclusion on these rapid fat loss studies. So a prerequisite of any accurate interpretation as to what's happening it has to include a body water assessment, because it would have changed my interpretation of my work, and it clearly would have changed the interpretation of their work.
It's funny because you mentioned keto and, the water retention and all that. And so many people get really excited when they first start keto because they lose like 10 pounds, like in the first week.
Yes.
And it's because like more than half of that is water, right? Because they're just like dropping all the glycogen and there's no carbs, especially if they do like a Atkins style with like aggressive like induction, and you're going to down to less than 20 grams of carb. Like you mostly lose water, but it feels great to see that, on the scale, if like you've been stalled for a long time, and, over time you eventually will get those, results, but then they get that and then they stall for like 10 weeks. And I'm like, no, you got all your weight loss at the beginning, but it's happening like, behind the scenes, over time. But that's really interesting. Now I don't trust any. I'm like thinking back to hundreds of studies that, claimed that a certain amount of lean body mass was lost, and now wondering if it included, body water. So that's really helpful to know to look out for that.
And let me say, it only should question your interpretation if those studies were aggressive and short term. If the studies were like a month or longer, body water, for whatever reason, it goes back to normal levels, even with weight loss. So don't let it ruin your entire life of reading research and say, oh no,
yeah,
only this small subset of research where it was aggressive and 2 to 3 weeks or less of an aggressive diet approach. Also, I want to say, when we lose fat-free mass, even though a lot of it is water, we're losing a little bit of lean tissue. So I don't want to say, oh, it's nothing. If you're losing fat-free mass, it's generally not all going to be water. There's going to be some. And then something else you can look at, which my study did, was you can look at resting metabolic rate. And that is it's almost a hack, or it's a proxy for what happens to lean to muscle tissue when dieting. And the reason I say this is, with all of my research, when we had subjects, and my subjects are always typically female, but almost always fit people, when they have lost muscle mass, they also have their metabolic rate goes down. When we've been able to maintain their muscle mass, their metabolic rates stay the same. So from the data in my lab over the years, I can look at the RMR data, the resting and tell you almost probably to the gram, maybe not the gram, but tell you generally, yeah, this subject lost muscle tissue, this subject didn't. And it's really cool to see that. And again, I don't think a lot of people know that. Yeah. So let me just also say, in my rapid fat loss study, after 2 weeks, there was a significant reduction in resting metabolic rate. And then 2 weeks later, that recovered back to nearly baseline levels, which again tells me, yeah, maybe lost a little bit, which we know there was a little bit of dry fat-free mass lost, but you just come out of this less aggressively, and the RMR matched what we found with the fat-free mass data, like it usually does.
Yeah, that's a really helpful point. Now, you've been looking at research specifically on body recomposition for years and conducting a lot yourself. So I'd love to get your opinion on a couple of topics that have sort of research or evidence showing both sides. Like, so one of them is protein leverage. And, for me, I personally have accepted the protein leverage as a fact. Some people still refer to it as a hypothesis, but for me, I've seen enough evidence in the research and also in my own life that I'm, just looking especially at ad libitum studies and, preloading people with protein, and then experiencing the incredible satiety, and then understanding the biochemical pathways behind the satiety involved in eating and prioritizing protein. There is a little bit of research that I've seen that says, no, like protein really doesn't give you that satiety or that leverage. So when you see conflicting evidence like that, how do you form an opinion on it? And I guess obviously some of it comes down to the quality of the research on both sides, but What do you think about protein leverage? Because I know you recently, I think it was the most recent review, you broke down a study. It wasn't Robbenheimer and Simpson who originated the hypothesis, but it was some other scientists or researchers I saw there.
Yeah. So that study is it's in the current issue, which actually just got released last week. I always release the
October,
June,
right?
Yes, the October. I always release in the middle of the month. And essentially that study, and I'll answer your question, but essentially that study was the best study I've ever read. That as I'm reading the setup to this, I said, okay, if this study, if it comes out one way, it's really going to validate or support the protein leverage model or hypothesis, but I know you don't like that word. Or if this study comes out in a different way, it's going to invalidate or say that this really isn't much of the evidence would not suggest that the protein leverage model is a valid model. So I like this question. I'm going to rephrase your question. If we have some studies that report one thing and other studies that report something else, how do I come to a conclusion on what I think? Well, many times I don't come to a conclusion and then I just don't talk about it. I only talk about things. No, and I say that seriously.
Yeah.
I generally only talk about things where I have an opinion, and then I think you can appreciate me. And I'm a scientist. I'm just like, hey, the evidence leads me to believe this. Like I'm not banging or trying to pound people over the head and say this is a fact. I'm like, hey, I've read the research and this is my interpretation. And as I just admitted, I was somewhat wrong on rapid fat loss as I've done more research and reading. So even then, if I haven't been outspoken, I think people give me grace when I change my mind on a certain topic. So with the protein, and let's just keep it limited to protein and satiation. Or does eating more protein make you feel fuller so that you eat less calories? If that's the discussion here, globally, here's how I interpret that. There are some studies that show that protein helps with satiety. And I would assume satiation. So satiation is when you feel full enough that you stop eating a meal. And then satiety is you're not hungry in between meals. So let's just call it appetite. So some studies would suggest that protein improves your feeling of fullness. You're not going to eat as much at the next meal. You're not going to eat as much in a day. Other research says, no, it doesn't matter if you have protein. So what I see when I read that is there's a directional outcome. If anything, the research, whenever there's a difference, it's always in favor of protein. When there's not an outcome with protein, it's that it's no different than carbs or fat. You'll never see a study where protein increases hunger or it makes you feel less full. So that, to me, the chips are kind of stacked towards the eat more protein to help with fullness and satiety. And then again, then you have the protein leverage model, which they have an entire model that tries to describe this. That's, that was, I think, observed first in crickets or grasshoppers or something. I think you know more about the origins than I do.
Locusts.
Locusts, thank you. I would have eventually gotten there. So there's how what does the totality of the research say? And I hedge in that direction. And I'm telling you, the study that I have in this month, that study was so well designed. It was insanely well, and I mean insanely well done. And I'll just say to the extent where the plates that they served the food on were specific sizes and designed to make sure that the snacks were on one size plate and the meals were on another size plate, same color. They wanted to eliminate any type of psychological bias or anything other than food macronutrient composition to influence the eating behaviors. So
I saw you highlighted that like all the food had been pre-tested, which is not something you see a lot.
In another study,
right?
They basically validated that the subjects could not tell the difference between a high protein meal or snack and the low protein meal or snack. Because if you know the difference, that can easily influence you one way or the other. And typically protein doesn't taste good. Like it's not as, at least I'll speak for myself. I don't ever get really excited about eating, oh, great, another chicken breast. But if it's, high sugar, like or like a birthday cake, ooh, then I get. So anyway, they did a lot of good things. So you need to look at, what do you do when studies conflict? Try to read the breadth of that literature. Is there a direction with the findings? And it's okay to just say, I don't know.
All right. So what did they find in this incredible study?
So the protein leverage model. And this, I started off the article. I always give a background, and I'm like, what are dietitians and everybody's always arguing about with the cause of obesity? Oh, it's you're eating too many carbs, or no, it's dietary fat. Like, that's always the argument: carbs, fat. Why does nobody ever brings protein into that discussion, except for the people who have knowledge and that are not ignorant about this whole other model called the protein leverage model?
That's what I love the most about protein leverage, is it makes it about protein instead of about the energy macros.
Yes. So let me quickly, I can do this in about 60 seconds. Let me explain the model, and then you can correct me where I've gone off track and say, well, actually it's this. My understanding is the human body, our appetites are wired more so to protein intake than anything else. And it's such that we will continue to have an increased hunger drive until we get a daily intake, a threshold of protein. So if you're eating a low protein breakfast and a low protein lunch, your hunger drive is going to be elevated all day, and you're going to continue to want to eat foods until you get this threshold of protein. And the research would suggest we actually don't crave the protein, we crave the highly palatable food. So it actually works against us. We are more hungry because of a lack of protein, and then we seek out, highly palatable, high-fat foods, which are also calorically dense. In contrast, if we meet a daily threshold of protein intake, now that now calms our appetite, and we don't have an elevated hunger drive. So protein really is the linchpin of appetite. Would you add to that or clean that up?
I think that's exactly it. You put it really succinctly. And I mean, Robbenheimer and Simpson talk about 5 nutrient drives that we have, and protein and carbs and sodium and calcium, I think, are the 5. But that is exactly what they say, that you're, driven to get a certain protein, threshold, or hit that or meet that, which makes sense when you think about the fact that we have, essential amino acids, and the fact that food companies tend to manipulate that a lot with like umami flavors and like the cheese coating on Doritos and stuff. It gives you a sense that you're getting protein, even though you're not. You're getting carbs that taste like protein. So like I think that also gives a little bit of weight, because they know they know how to manipulate our taste buds, and they know that's a strong, it's one of the strong drives. But yes, you summarized it very well.
So the study now, and again, I don't think I've not seen a better study to test this model. What they did was they had males and females enter a metabolic kitchen for 4-day periods. So total study duration was 12 days, but 4 days at a time. So 4 days they were there, then they took like a week off. They came back another 4 days, took another week off, and they came back another 4 days. During each 4-day visit to the research clinic, to what I call like a place where you live and you get all your food served to you, they had a low protein diet, a moderate protein diet, and a high protein diet. So 10% of all calories were from protein in the low, and then it was 15% in the moderate and 25% protein in the high. And what makes the study so awesome was they disguised the food so that the subjects had no idea. And there's literally, I mean, you can see the picture. So they also had snacks, not just meals, but snacks. And even the snacks were 10, 15, or 25% protein. So every subject was given, they were served a meal, and they could eat as much of the meal or as little of the meal as they wanted. So it was an ad libitum study. And because they lived in the research facility for 4 days, everything was measured. So whatever they didn't eat, they could weigh. And if the subject said, hey, for lunch, I ate everything you gave me, I want more lunch, they would give them more lunch. So they could eat as much or as little as they wanted. The snacks they gave them with their meals. And then if they wanted to eat the snack or 2 or 3 snacks, they could. Or if they wanted to take it back to their room and put it in a refrigerator, they could. So unlimited access to snacks as well. And they basically said, okay, how many calories? The main question is, if the protein leverage model is, if it is going to be valid, this study would have to, I mean, and let me say, one study doesn't validate or invalidate an entire model. But if it's going to support the model, that's a better word. If this study is going to support the model, what would happen is that the low protein, the 10%, the low protein group or the low protein meals, they would have eaten more calories than the 15 and 25% meals during these 4 days. And that's exactly what they found. They found that when subjects were eating a 10% protein diet that was unknown to them, they could not tell the difference between the different foods. When they ate low protein diet, they ate significantly more calories. It was a 12% more calories on average each day. Where did those calories come from? It came from the snacks more so than any of the meals. And it was mostly the carbs, a carb and fat intake. The 15 and the 25%, they both were essentially equal. They ate significantly fewer calories with the higher protein content than the low protein diet. But interestingly, I would think, oh, the 25% would even have a greater muting of appetite and caloric intake. But it didn't. It was the same as the 15%. So that tells me, the way that I interpret this is, until you get to a given threshold of protein intake in the day, you're going to have elevated hunger. But once you meet that threshold, there's not a further advantage to eating more and more protein. One other thing, they also measured appetite, and the appetite was a little bit more nuanced, but essentially after breakfast, if you had a very low protein first meal of the day, a breakfast, then you were significantly more hungry the rest of the day. Then yes, when you only had 10% protein. Over the entire course of the day, though, there really wasn't much of a difference. But I always look at appetite as that's not as important as actual calories. So calories is the main thing. And then we can try to explain what's going on with appetite, but because that's subjective, that wasn't an objective measure. So there's the study.
I mean, anyone who wants to test this out, I say, if you're going to like a party, like Christmas time, holidays are coming, like eat 2 chicken breasts at home and then go to the party and see how you feel, versus like basically just have low protein breakfast and lunch and then go to the party. And it's crazy what a difference it makes. Like I feel so passionate about it, this research and this hypothesis, this model, because it's been so life-changing for me, to know this information and, to understand why, when I was like plant-based and I wasn't getting enough protein and I wasn't doing it properly. I'm not saying you can't do that properly, but it takes some privilege and some resources to do it. That I always felt hungry and I was always thinking about food, and it's been so freeing to just like be able to eat and live, like take my energy, put it towards projects and, fulfilling my goals, instead of constantly thinking about like, what are they going to have at this party? Are they going to have like food that I'm going to enjoy? No, like I can just go and enjoy the social connection and not like focus so much on it. So it's been such a powerful concept. And it's great to see it validated in such high quality research like that. So I can guess your opinion is probably more in favor of protein being a slightly more satiety inducing macronutrient than carbs and fat.
Yes. Yeah. I come to that conclusion. And again, if anybody were to challenge that, I would show them this study.
Yeah.
What other study blinded the subjects? And something else I've learned, I did a lot of reading. I just did personal research, not like a laboratory based, but the people that I talk to that are appetite researchers, let's call them the experts, what they have impressed upon me is don't put a lot of confidence in these studies, which I used to do, where you're giving somebody a high protein or any type of meal, and then you're looking at what happens at the next meal. They're saying that's highly variable. And again, a lot of the protein studies show that. You eat a high protein meal, you eat less at the next meal. But there's also a lot of studies that would report that it doesn't, that you eat a lot of protein, you eat just as many calories at the next meal. So knowing that was impressed upon me from communications with these people that specialize in this, that's where this study becomes much more valuable, because it wasn't meal, it was 28 meals, and it was a day 2, a day 3, a day 4. So that really tends to get rid of the limitations of this other large body of research. And let's appreciate it's very easy to give somebody a meal and make a manipulation and then measure what they do in the next meal. That's why probably 95 out of 100 studies on appetite are like that, because they're easy. This study, well, I can't imagine the cost. I mean, they had to have an entire food science kitchen staff to prepare this. And remember what we said, they conducted an entire other study to validate that the meals were actually camouflaged, hidden, so that the subjects didn't know what was high or low protein.
It's like the ultimate placebo, like sort of scenario. I love it. So there's one other study I've been wanting to ask you about. It was probably my favorite one that you reviewed aside from this one. And it was the women who ate more protein and ended up losing more body fat. And what was really interesting is that they had, so I know there's a lot of studies out there like that, but this one was the one comparing the whey protein isolate and the whey protein hydrolysate. And I think we messaged back and forth about it, because I said, that's really interesting that the hydrolysate actually caused even more fat loss than the isolate. And you mentioned it wasn't the first study that you had seen that hydrolysate had done that. And so I was looking at hydrolysate, I'm like, it's basically just more rapidly absorbed. So yeah, I'm curious if you had any thoughts on, so basically the study was concluding that we're showing that if you eat more protein and your goal is body recomposition, you will tend to lose more fat, which I think is also an opinion that you hold, having seen a lot of research on it, but you can correct me if I'm wrong. But then there was this other layer with the hydrolysate that I was curious if you had any thoughts on.
So just globally, I do believe that a higher protein diet is better, and it can actually cause fat loss. I mean, it describes you were what I think people in the industry would call skinny fat prior.
Yeah.
And that is what I don't know which study I'm like a protein, half of my research reviews centered on protein. Oh, and I am going to do a study in the future where protein was not effective for something, just so I can say, hey, these studies exist too. And how does this make me, how do I interpret this? So I want to challenge, I want to make sure that I'm highlighting the rare study where protein isn't. But increasing protein can actually cause fat loss. Yes, I believe that. It appears to be true when you start with low or suboptimal protein and you get it to normal. But if you're already eating, let's say 1.8 grams per kg and you go to 2.2, I don't have evidence to say, oh yes, you're going to lose more body fat.
Right.
I would say, look, almost powerful what happens when you're starting with low and you just increase it to even moderate, or if you get the high grade, that's when the body, and it's funny. Yeah. I noticed when I was dating my wife, I saw the same thing, very low protein, changed just the protein, lost fat, better outcomes with lean mass as well.
Yes.
So there's my thought on that. And then, the hydrolysate. So hydrolysate, as I think of, and I don't have much to offer here because I don't know why. Hydrolysate, if anything, can have a few more carbs and fats in it. Like whey protein isolate guarantees that the protein content is at least 90%.
Mhm.
So that means if I have a scoop of protein, that's 20 grams. If it's whey protein isolate, we know that 18 grams have to be protein. That's what defines an isolate. Hydrolysate, it can be an isolate, but again, those studies, they're never very clear. So hydrolysate, as you said, it's like pre-digested. It's
Mhm.
enzymatically altered such that we have these shorter peptides. And what I know at this point is I know of at least 2 studies. I think the other author was Lockwood. If you ever want to look up that name, Lockwood, he also came to the conclusion that whey protein hydrolysate caused significantly more fat loss in humans. I always like to rely on human data in humans than an isolate. I have not spent enough time to go into the details of why, but I look at this and I'd say, hey, if I was ever going to offer a protein supplement, I may have like a and also if an hydrolysate that's a little lower in protein also tastes a lot better. Whey protein isolate, you got to do a lot of things to make it taste better as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, I almost think that a whey protein hydrolysate, you could effectively market that. Not that I'm in the food marketing business or supplement business, but there appears to be something, and again, I haven't researched it enough to have an opinion, but why is it causing more fat loss? Well, again, it's been in at least 2 studies, and I want to say 3, but 2 that I have it in my own personal library.
Mhm. Yeah, that's really interesting. I guess we'll have to keep searching to figure out what it is about it. All right, now just want to wrap up on 2 little bit controversial topics. Now, one you've been covering extensively, and that is semaglutide, basically peptide, the use of peptides for inducing weight loss. And I think you've been doing an amazing job covering it, breaking it down, helping people to understand what it is, what the mechanisms of it are. And being a subscriber of your research review, I got to get access to that, and I learned a lot about what's going on. Now, there's been some really crazy headlines lately about it, talking about the side effects, which are concerning. So people having stomach paralysis. And my concern with it, I think that there's an incredible potential in personalized medicine and using peptides, like different kinds of peptides, to help people. And I think people, if they're drowning, sometimes they need a life raft, they need something to help them. But I am concerned that the people that this is being marketed to actively, or that are using it, are the people who are probably not prioritizing protein and not doing resistance training, or they would have had already experienced some of the effects of GLP-1 in the body. And because of that, I think when you broke down some of the step studies, there was one of them that talked about the lean body mass loss. A lot of them, unfortunately, as you noted, had not recorded body composition, but that one showed, I think it was like 39 maybe percent lean body mass loss. So what are your overall thoughts on Ozempic or Wegovy, as I guess that is more the weight loss form of it?
Well, if your question is specific to the lean mass, I can phrase it like this. Every study, of which I'm aware of 2 currently, that measured body composition, they both report a higher loss of lean body mass than what would be expected with dieting alone, just reducing food intake alone. Both of them, one was 39, one was 40 or 41. So I just say 40%.
Yeah.
What you expect to see in the same population with weight loss through dieting is without a medical intervention is about a 25% loss of fat-free mass. So they're seeing 40%. And
sorry, and the 25%, is that with like having protein prioritized, or
no, that's just the entire
standard?
Yes, that's the standard. That's the obesity research literature. You put people with obesity on a diet, they lose a lot of weight. 1/4 of it is from lean mass stores. 3/4, 75% are coming from fat stores. So I always tend to look at research. If it's more than that, that's not a good outcome. If it's less than that, we're doing better. And of course, in our world, when you have resistance training and you prioritize protein, you maintain almost all of your lean mass when dieting. I mean, it's not surprising to us at that level. So every study, which there's only 2, and isn't it interesting that there's only been 2? There's been, I don't know, 10, 20, 30 studies, but why not measure body composition? Well,
right.
there might be a reason why they don't want to measure body composition. And why? Now we can ask, why is that happening? Well, there's no known mechanism as to why these GLP-1 agonists or semaglutide, Ozempic, Whey, we don't know why it would be causing greater amounts of lean mass loss. I would say let's not complicate this. It's probably because the appetites are suppressed so much that people are eating 500, 800 calories per day, and in many cases have to strive to eat that, and that there's just no energy coming into the body to maintain lean body mass. That is my opinion. That is what I think is happening. And anecdotally, there are many people who just have zero appetite. It's gone.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy. And it makes sense. So unfortunately, there's probably not a way to help more of those people other than recommending that they work with, potentially a physician who understands these concepts. But as you were mentioning in one of your posts, you saw it like in the mall and
my mall.
Yeah. And someone else commented that it was being offered at their nail salon, which really disturbed me. So, there are probably situations where people are not, having any doctor supervision or assistance, with it. And unfortunately, if they knew about protein and weight resistance training, it could probably help with the outcome. Because what do you think is going to happen when all these people go off of it?
Well, theoretically, they won't go off of it because the research suggests that the one study where they looked at that, they gained the weight back when they stopped. And I mean, let's also appreciate the pharmaceutical companies. They're not gonna, they don't, why would you want somebody to come off of it from the business interest side? And again, if I was employed by the pharmaceutical industry, I'd probably yes, take this for your life because it keeps the weight off. And just so everybody knows, I'm not anti-obesity medication. I'm not anti-weight loss drugs. I'm not for them either. I'm just trying to educate and bring some nuance. And I'm really trying to encourage fitness professionals. Don't ignore this. This is not going away. Get into the game. Help people that are on this. Help them with resistance training. Help them prioritize protein. In fact, there's probably a huge opportunity for fitness professionals. But I get, and my first instinct is I don't like this because my PhD was in exercise and nutrition.
Yeah.
So that's where I choose to put my efforts. But 1, it's not going away. 2, a lot of people are getting help and are getting a positive outcome from this. Unfortunately, some people are getting very serious side effects.
Yeah.
But we as fitness professionals, if we know they're losing lean mass, we have the tool, at least in the people that are that are evidence-based fitness professional coaches, we know how to help that. And it's funny, if I were working with, and right now I work with people who are trying to stay off of the drug. They're like, hey, I just want to try one more time. I'm like, okay, I'll help you try to stay off of it. But again, that's between you and your physician. But it's almost like a reversal of how we normally work with weight loss clients. We normally say, hey, let's reduce your calories. We're going to try all these techniques that like protein leverage model. Let's make sure your protein's high. Let's make sure you're doing some aerobic, everything to help your appetite. Where with the medication for a lot of people, it's let's make sure that we're giving you enough calories so that you're only in a 30% deficit or 25% deficit. My strategy is almost reversed. We want you to have a calorie target that's higher than what your appetite would naturally lead you to do when you're taking this drug. We have to get protein into you because we think that would protect lean mass. So again, there are different strategies for this type of clientele. And since so many people are on it, I think there's some opportunities for fitness professionals to not necessarily have a glasses half full career response.
Now, looking at all the research that you have reviewed, what would you say was the most, what would you say is the study that surprised you the most in terms of their results and maybe made you reevaluate some of your previous beliefs? Now, I know we talked about the rapid fat loss one, so that was like a big shift in your thinking, but is there anything else in reviewing research maybe in the last year that made you either challenge a long held belief or shift a long held belief? Because I know, as you mentioned, you kind of have to sometimes exist in that like gray space with things where you're like, we have evidence on both sides, but I'm not going to, form a full opinion on this yet. And that's one of the things about science. The more you get into it, the more you realize we don't know. There's a lot that we don't know still. But I appreciate that you have an open mind and that you are, I think as a true scientist, someone who's willing to change their mind or change their opinion based on new research.
Yeah. So on that note, I'll just say the November issue, I'm for the first time, I'm reviewing 2 studies that come to the complete opposite findings. So I'm actually doing a research education. One study showed that drinking water was better than drinking diet beverages for weight loss. The other study showed diet soda was better than water. So what do we do? Well, that's
I've seen those.
Yes. So that's that. Again, just emphasizing it exists in every area of research. The studies you mentioned, the areas that have over the last year that have made me change my mind was rapid fat loss for sure. Short term water, counting for water, get in, get out. I think we can do that with no harm. The other one probably was a study that did meal timing. So typically I'm like, it doesn't matter. Eat 3, eat 5. But this study surprised me in the sense that they had a consistent meal timing for a short period of time, and they measured energy expenditure, and energy expenditure was significantly higher with consistent mealtime feedings. So it wasn't like massive, but it is an argument to say, it makes sense that you would eat at consistent times if your goal is to optimize your physique, and if you are desiring a faster metabolism to help burn more calories. So that study was one that stuck out, that I didn't anticipate that. And I know there's other research like chrononutrition, and I'm not an expert in that at all. But I do know that there's a lot of other thought that it does make sense. Be consistent with your food intake. Like, and again, to me, it makes sense from a planning standpoint. Like, whether it's 8, 12, 4, whatever, it makes sense from scheduling. But now we actually have resting energy expenditure, thermic effective food data to suggest, there's something to this.
All right. My very last question for you. If you could run any study in the world with an unlimited budget, what would you want that study to examine and hopefully prove without a shadow of a doubt?
I don't know if I care what it'll prove, but
Okay.
I would love to replicate that crazy 4-day rapid fat loss study in people who are not obese. So I'm going to do it myself. I will do that. Now there will be
You're going to walk for 8 hours and have 300 calories a day.
Yeah. Well, I think that's where I'm going to adjust it a little. I think knowing what I know about protein, I'll probably try to get up to like 1.6 or so. I will have more calories, but walking. And then I'm going to do this. And I think so. If I had an unlimited budget, I would run a study with that. Males, females, do blood work, find out who's responding to this. What about their metabolic profile, their hormonal data? Is there trends to say, hey, this person's going to be responding to this rapid fat loss approach more? By the way, where there's real benefit with this, there's research that I've become aware of where if people with obesity have early fat loss success, it actually propels them for long-term weight loss maintenance and they stick with things. So this isn't just an exercise in vanity or just, being crazy. It's no, if people can tolerate this and they can lose body fat, we may actually be helping their long-term outlook on maintaining fat loss. So that would be the study. So metabolic tests, blood work, and again, 4 days, I probably wouldn't do any resistance training, but as you extend to 10 days or 14 days, one, you can't be that severe that long, but at some point now you're going to want to have these anabolic stimuli. So that realm of research to me is where I would go. When do we what's the length of time where resistance training matters? 4 days? I don't think so. I think you're probably, you don't have enough energy to do resistance training and the cardio. But if we did this for 8 days, maybe 1 day per week. So that's what I would do.
That's awesome. Well, I hope you do share your N of 1 results when you do this experiment on your own. Dr. Campbell, thank you so much for taking the time to be back on the podcast with us. Now, I will link everything in the show notes, which is for listeners when they're on the go. Where can they find your research review, subscribe to it, and follow you and your work online?
So thank you for asking. My website is billcampbellphd.com. If you go there, I'm giving away my greatest hits of year 1. So you can kind of see, do I like this research review? And again, the research review, I'm reviewing studies that solely focus on fat loss or muscle mass. So building muscle, maintaining muscle. That's great. But the best thing is I bring in experts like you. You have been one of my experts. And the experts basically say, okay, there's the research. These are what these boring researchers did. Here's how I would apply it in my world of actually working with clients. So I think that's where the true value is. So if you go to my website, it's billcampbellphd.com, get the greatest hits issue to see if you like it. If you do like it, it's $7.99 per month, and it's a monthly subscription. And people can find me on Instagram at Bill Campbell PhD. So everything's Bill Campbell PhD.
Yeah, you definitely have one of the best Instagram accounts. You make it really engaging with the quizzes, and I always see them, and I'm glad they always show up in my feed. And I always take a moment just to answer mentally and then check if I got it right. So it's usually pretty affirming.
Good. Well, you're highly vested because I use every last character I'm allowed. So you're if you get to the end, you're vested.
Oh, awesome. Well, thanks again for being here today, and I really appreciate all your insight.
Yeah, thank you for having me again.
All right, my friends, I hope that you enjoyed the episode today with Dr. Bill Campbell as much as I enjoyed getting to record it. I always love talking to Dr. Campbell about research studies, and especially fat loss, protein, and body recomposition and exercise. And it was so much fun to talk about all of these topics with him today, including some controversial ones and also where he lands in terms of his opinion on the ability of protein as a macronutrient to help really reduce hunger, curb appetite, induce satiation, and also help us to burn more fat and so much more. So I will link all of Dr. Campbell's research review and social media in the show notes if you want to check those out. It's one of my favorite accounts on Instagram to follow. So do be sure to go and follow his research. He puts out really fun quizzes every day that are super engaging and help you learn a lot too in the process. Now, we actually ended up chatting a little bit after the podcast about the brand new second generation of the Tone device, which I am releasing at the moment. If you would like to get the exclusive launch discount and also get first access to exclusive promotions and sales and giveaways that we will be doing for the new second generation of the Tone device, which is here. If you are watching this podcast, you can see this is the new second generation. This is the black and rose gold version of it. and it is more accurate than ever before. And all you need to do is turn it on, blow into it for 4 to 5 seconds, and you will get feedback on your rate of fat burning. Our bodies are at the highest rate of fat burning when we are in a state of ketosis, and it will tell you and give you context in terms of where your fat burning is, if you're light fat burning or in the fat burning zone or not really in ketosis at all. It provides amazing feedback for that. So if you'd like to go to tonedevice.com, you can get all the info on this brand new launch of the 2nd generation. We also talked about the impact of whey protein isolate and hydrolysate to really drive fat loss. And I have been working on launching my own protein powder for a little while now. We are about to launch, but we are going to be doing an exclusive launch discount for listeners and members of this community. If you want to get on that list, go to toneprotein.com and you can sign up there with your name and email and you'll be added to the list. And we will also be doing lots of giveaways, special promotions, sales, and also just sharing really valuable insight on the impact of protein on body recomposition. So that is at toneprotein.com. So again, that's tonedevice.com and toneprotein.com. I appreciate you all so much for being here and for listening. So until the next episode, I am sending you all so much love and wishing you a fat-fueled rest of your day. Thanks for listening and bye for now.